Okay, we are now recording. So my name is Melanie Gertis. I'm the licensed counselor for Victoria College, and we have Samuel Villa with us. Again, he presented on another topic, and today he will be discussing prescription drugs.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samuel Villa, and I'm with Midcoast Family Services. Just real briefly, I want to discuss who Midcoast Services, who we are, and what exactly we do. Um, in my department, I work in the youth department, which is we go to every elementary school, every middle school, every high school in the area, and we go into classrooms and gyms and auditoriums, and we basically discuss making good choices and present the idea to have alternative thinking whenever a student decides that they want to make a bad choice, or if they want to do something uh, that's against normal mores and norms. And so what we do is we advocate for the students, and we also do community events, just like I'm doing right now, which we reach out to the community. We do curbside events, and we do community events, just like I'm doing right now. And we also have a thrift store. We have two thrift stores, which every penny that is made through the thrift store goes direct.
Sorry, I accidentally muted you, Samuel.
All right, can you hear me now?
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. We have a women's shelter, which of course shelters women from any kind of domestic abuse that they may be experiencing. We have a homeless department, which helps with the homeless population, and by homeless, I just don't mean people living out on the streets. If there are families that are doubled up, living with a relative or living with a friend, they're considered homeless as well. So the homeless department uh, helps them with rental assistance, helping them find temporary housing that can ultimately lead to permanent housing. So that's just who we are at Midcoast. We're a nonprofit agency. We get funded by the state of Texas. So any of the services that we do provide are free of charge. Okay. So today I'm going to talk to you about prescription drugs, discussing the science of it, the history of it, and how it affects you as college students, how it affects some of us here that are parents. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see.
And your camera is off. I don't know if it's working right now or not.
Okay, I'll turn it on whenever. Okay, can everybody see the slide that says the science behind addiction? Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so today we're going to be discussing the science behind addiction, understanding prescription drug abuse. Um, the decision to use prescription drugs is voluntary, but with continued use, the ability to practice self-control becomes compromised depending on the drug that we're taking. Okay, so the fastest growing drug problem in the United States isn't cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamines. It's actually prescription drugs. And the reason for that is because prescription drugs are legal. And not only are they legal, they're easily accessible. pretty much all you would need is a prescription from a doctor. Now, you can go to a doctor as whether it's your physical, whether you go for any kind of physical ailment. If you just mention that you're having any kind of uh, mental health problem, I mean, it could be something as simple as having trouble sleeping or expressing uh, pain that isn't consecutive, happening on consecutive days, but happens every often. Uh, Having trouble sleeping, having anxious moments before a test, anything that could be said regarding that matter. And if you ask the doctor, they can prescribe you uh, a low dosage of prescription drugs dealing with mental health issues. And so a lot of times when we're talking about prescription drugs, we're talking about uh, drugs that are affecting your sleep, your mental health. And when we're talking about opioids, it could be talking about pain. And as we go around the subject here, I'm going to be discussing not only obviously, because they're given by doctors, they do have benefits, but we're also going to talk about some of the problems that could occur. So just to give you an idea of how opioids affect the brain, and whenever I give this presentation to students, or whenever I'm actually in person, I like to display, give a description of how opioids work. And the way I do that is to describe how there's these little, I just call them cups. Our receptors, they're cups. They're shaped like a cup. They're shaped where something, a chemical can fit in there, and these receptors uh, can catch dopamine. And the way I describe it in person is I hold up a small plastic cup, and I put one Skittle in the cup, and that Skittle represents dopamine. And we get dopamine by exercising. We get dopamine by eating our favorite meal, being with a person that we enjoy spending time with. And that is a normal uh, dopamine reward system receptor. Now, the way I describe how opioids work in the brain, I pour the entire bag of Skittles in that cup, and to the point where the cup is overflowing with Skittles. Uh, and that's why it's so hard to quit using opioids, and that's why opioids are so addicting, is because it's an overstimulation in the brain. Now, it's a very pleasurable uh, part of the brain. So why would you want to stop doing something that makes you feel good? Um, and so that's how I describe it to the students that I work with. Um, and so that's when that rewiring of the brain, quitting cold turkey is not an option, because depending on what medication you take, the medication literally rewires the brain. Now, when we're talking about misuse and abuse, uh, they kind of go hand in hand. Uh, when you misuse prescription drugs, uh, you're taking them uh, more than what's just prescribed. You're taking the medications for different reasons. That's not primarily for what's prescribed to you, such as you take medication to lose weight, or you're using that medication to help you stay awake so you can study more. And but that also goes into abuse, because you may still be using the medication for reasons not for what is prescribed more, but now you're not using it just to lose weight or just to help you study, You're using them to basically survive because one of the drawbacks to using prescription drugs is not only that they're so addicting, uh, quitting prescription drugs also result in very substantial withdrawal symptoms, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Now, this slide talks about how we receive our prescription drugs. And just take gender out of the equation, as you can see, most of the time, people who abuse and misuse prescription drugs get them from a relative or a friend. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your friend or relatives are drug dealers or they mean harm. Usually, they mean no harm. They have well intentions. Sometimes you'll complain of a headache or you'll complain of not being able to sleep, the same way you would tell a doctor. But if you're just mentioning in casual conversation, somebody might say, hey, well, I take Xanax, that helps me with my anxiety, or, hey, take this helps me fall asleep. Um, and so pretty much that's the first time you might use that medication, and you find that it's pleasurable, you find that it works. But then you start using it for different reasons. So more than often than not, the first time you use that medication is from a friend or a relative. And then second commonly is you get one from a doctor, which you're not breaking any rules, you're not breaking any laws. Uh, but you go to a doctor and you get a prescription for that medication. And if you use it appropriately, no problem. But if you start to become addicted, and if you start not being able to function without that medication, you might find yourself in trouble. Next is that you bought it from a friend or a relative. Could be that same relative that offered you their Xanax or offered you their Valium. Uh, Now it got to the point where you don't want to go to a doctor, you don't want that stigma, but yet it's easy just to call that friend or call that relative and offer to buy that from them. Uh, Next is you take it from a friend or a relative. So now you're not just asking for it, you're not just asking to buy it, now you're looking to find ways to steal from it. And when you're at this point, you're probably on the negative side of addiction. Then you're buying it from a drug dealer or a stranger. Then you're manipulating the medical system by going to more than one doctor to getting your prescription meds. And I don't want to know what that other is, to be honest with you. It's just if you're not getting it from a drug dealer or you're not trying to manipulate uh, the medical system, then you're probably doing something that's pretty bad, and now you're fully addicted. You're fully abusing that medication to where not even getting it from a drug dealer is making you is fulfilling that need. And what's happening here is that some of the reasons why people use drugs and prescription drugs, as you can see there, people use them to study, to relieve pain, to help deal with problems. And that's something that I see not only with high school students, but I've also seen it with middle school students um, who have been caught at school with some kind of medication, or they've been actively using. And when I talk to students that young, I can't help but to ask, well, what do you get out of it? What are you actually using this for? Um, and I would say more often than not, they would say, well, it helps me deal with my problems. And you would try to explain, like, well, it may erase your problem for a while. I said, but your problem's still going to be there. And it's just shocking to see that kids that young are using prescription drugs to help with their problems. But for older folks, we do use it, for numbing the pain, the emotional pain. It helps us relax, and sometimes it does helps us get high. And some people, we do search for that living normal life. Different uh, stimulants don't make us as happy as they used to be. So now we're searching for that chemical high, or we're looking for that pill that's gonna make us feel good for a little while, uh, and then again, the brain gets reprogrammed to where normal life isn't making us not is not making us happy. We're searching for that next quick fix that's gonna make us feel better. And the type of the prescription drugs, we broke it down into three. There's the opioids, which are your Oxycontin, Percocet, and they're used to treat pain. Next are the depressants, which are uh, Valium, Xanax, and it's used to treat anxiety and sleep disorders. And lastly, stimulants, Ritalin, Adderall, and it's prescribed to treat ADHD. And these medications, they affect the brain's pleasure center. Just I explained earlier how the pleasure principle works overtime when we're talking about using prescription drugs. Their chemicals are very much go directly to the brain, and any prescription, uh, it affects the brain. It goes through our bloodstream, goes all the way to the brain. Whether it's stimulants, depressants, pain relievers, they always go directly to the brain. And the example I used earlier about the Skittles overflowing uh, through the receptor, that's basically how it works, and that is how addiction starts to run rampant, where you're not realizing that your normal life isn't enough anymore. So now you're looking for something that's going to create pleasure, that's going to create happiness. Uh, so again, I'll just give you another example, and it always has to involve food because that's what I do. uh, so in this example, you go to school all day, you work at night, you haven't had time to eat. So you get home and you don't feel like cooking anything because cooking's gonna take too long. So you walk into your house and the first thing you see is a box of saltine crackers. You're hungry, you don't want to wait. You just open that package up and you eat that one saltine cracker. Now, because you're so hungry, that's the best saltine cracker you've ever eaten. You eat one, you eat two, and before you know it, you've eaten half the sleeve. Okay, so that's how the dopamine works, is that it gives you pleasure, it makes you feel good. Even if it's just a saltine cracker, it makes you feel that this is the best cracker you've ever eaten. Now try to imagine, you know, feeling that way and multiply it by a million. Uh, that's what it I mean, I'm not talking about personal experience, but that's what's happening when it comes to using a chemical like opioids, like stimulants to help you get that high. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Anthony Bourdain. He's a famous chef. He's a documentarian. He uh, he travels around the world, and he learns about people's cultures and their food. And unfortunately, a few years ago, he committed suicide. Uh, and one of his famous quotes that he left us with was, he said that he has a great life, he has a great family, he lives the life that he never thought he would be able to live in his life. He's able to travel the world and meet different people. Has money, more money than he ever thought he would ever have. But his quote was, "That happiness will never come close to the high I got when I was using cocaine." And ultimately, that's what ended up taking his life, was that he was tired of having everything but not appreciating it, because he was, even though he was in recovery, he continued to chase that high. And he became addicted to cocaine because he started with a prescription of stimulants. And when the prescription drugs didn't work, he started using cocaine and meth, and he also became addicted to opioids as well. So the prescription drugs don't discriminate. They'll take hold of anybody in any situation at any time. Uh, and so it's important that you understand that when you feel yourself not being able to function without the use of any kind of medication, that would be probably the time to get some help. Okay, and we're just gonna briefly talk about some of the how it affects the overall health in regards to using prescription drugs. Um, the pain relievers, the depressants, it's highly addicting. You you're using a pain relievers when you're breathing slowly, you become drowsy, and if you use too much, you become nauseous, you vomit, and you have stomach issues. Um, one of the downfalls, one of the warning signs they give you whenever you do take opioids is that they do affect the digestive system. And as far as stimulants go, Adderall, Ritalin, has you may complain of a rapid heartbeat, increased breathing rates, and you run the risk of having a heart attack. And when using your depressants and your sedatives, again, your breathing is shallow. You may slow your speech. Brain function may not be 100%, and you start to lose judgment and self-control. And depending on the dosage and depending on the amount that you're using and why you're using it, one of the side effects is thoughts of suicide. Okay. This was a very interesting slide that I saw. The effects of ADHD medication and the use of cocaine affect the brain similarly. Now, I thought this was amazing. I didn't know this was an actual thing. Um, but yeah, the using Ritalin and cocaine are basically affect the brain the same way. Now, of course, cocaine, you either smoke it or snort it up your nose, whereas using Ritalin, it's in pill form. So it doesn't go directly to the brain, but it does affect the brain the same way. Uh, and I know some of us may have kids, or maybe some of us do take Ritalin, uh, and it's prescribed from a doctor, and we use it appropriately, and we don't abuse it. Uh, but just we be wary of the fact that if we start to become numb to the effects and we desire more, uh, again, that's about the time that we probably would need some kind of help and assistance in that area. Now, if you're abusing stimulant, right now we're just going to focus on stimulants. If you're abusing stimulants, you are taking them to cram for a test. Yes, it's not meant as a method to keep you awake. When I read this, the first thing I think of is Saved by the Bell, when Jesse Spano was, taking that medication to help her study for the test, and it wasn't just helping her stay awake, as the famous scene where she's pretty much flipping out. And I know some of you want me to recreate that scene. I'm not going to. But yeah, she did develop some kind of mental health issues because she was using stimulants to stay awake. Uh, if you're using stimulants to help you lose weight, uh, it does suppress the appetite. Uh, it does give you energy to exercise, but what happens is you're not doing that naturally, and if it doesn't come from a natural state, if your brain isn't getting that dopamine from a natural state, uh, you could be leading into a realm where you're starting to become addicted to it, and also trying to when you stop using stimulants to help you lose weight, then you're more likely to gain all that weight back and even more. It's not a long-term solution to help you lose weight. Usually, if your goal is to lose weight, then talk to a doctor, or Victoria has a lot of gyms that you can join to help you lose weight. But I would say before anybody takes a pill to help you lose weight, to contact a professional to help you with that. And of course, if you use stimulants to get high, um, you're more likely to become addicted because that's the only reason why you're using them. Uh, Sometimes the dosage may be not what you're looking for, so then you go for something stronger with a more dosage, with a higher dosage, and so the addiction can get pretty intense at that time. And now, in regards to opioids and treatment for opioids, there's three different substances you can use um, to help you get rid of that addiction to opioids. And so they're all legal. They're all that you can get from a doctor. However, they do have pretty intense withdrawal symptoms and also side effects. Some of them, just like methadone, which is the more popular uh, drug to help treat opioid abuse, you can't get that from a doctor. You would have to get it from an actual facility. Um, and sometimes you would have to go daily. And having to go to the uh, same building, same department, the same every day is not something that you want to happen in your daily life, because sometimes those appointments can take hours. Also, the sub-2X is they have high withdrawal symptoms. If you don't use it, you can be having withdrawal symptoms just as you were having withdrawal symptoms from using actual opioids. And some of us that have children, and I'm going to be talking about that for the next three slides in regards to our younger generation, whether it's our kids, whether it's our brothers or sisters, nieces, nephews. Um, there's certainly a lot of risk factors when it comes to uh, prescription drug addiction. But a lot of things that we don't see is that they're also protective factors. Now, what are risk factors and what are protective factors? Risk factors, they're just things in our life, things in society that give us not a reason, but they steer us towards the direction to where we're going to use prescription drugs, or we're going to use any kind of drugs. Now, what the protective factors are the things that are going to minimize those factors. For example, uh, if you know somebody who's very aggressive, that is a teenager or a middle school student or an elementary student that is very aggressive, but at the same time, they have good self control. where they do get angry, but they don't always act out on that anger. Risk factor is having poor social skills. Maybe they don't have a lot of friends. Maybe they don't aren't popular, or they're loners and they sit by themselves during lunch. One of those protective factors is, well, maybe they value positive relationships. Maybe they sit by themselves because they don't want to be a part of that crowd. Or they, the people that sit at the table next to them, maybe they're too rowdy, or maybe those kids get in trouble. So maybe they're putting uh, positive relationships on a premium. So that way they're picky and they get to choose uh, who they're who they're friends with. Uh, and also the availability of drugs at school. Believe it or not, it's very easy to get drugs at school. Not only prescription drugs, but any kind of drugs. Vaping is a very big issue, not only in the middle school and high school, but even in elementary schools. Uh, I was invited to talk to Sacred Heart School in Hallettsville. Now, Sacred Heart is a small Catholic school in a small town. So when I talked to the principal, I was ready to give a vaping presentation to high school students, and he says, "Well, no, this presentation is for our fifth graders." And so even in small towns, even in small Catholic schools, it's very easy to get drugs. But at the same time, the protective factor is you have staff and principals, and maybe there's a community that is very aware of what's going on. They can create anti-drug rules, and they can create things that are going to be able to combat that. Um, and also there's lots of other risk factors and protective factors to combat all those things right there. And again, we're going to talk about more of the protective factors. And basically, what I wanted to share with you when talking about protective and risk factors is that for every bad thing that we see going on in our communities, in our schools, there's also something good to follow up with that. So, for example, if your student, if your son, daughter, brother, sister, if they're if they have the desire to want to do good, if all their friends are using drugs but they're not, that's a positive factor. If they just have that desire to do well, um, if there's a community that looks after the younger generation and encourages them well to do well, that is a protective factor. Now, on the other side, if you have a community or if you have family members who just don't care, or if there's people who see somebody that's doing well for themselves and they try to bring them down, or make fun of them if they're making good grades, or make them feel not worthy because they made honor roll and not celebrate that, uh, that is a risk factor. And you're probably thinking, well, what does this have to do with prescription drugs? What is the fact that people are being haters? What does that have to do with using prescription drugs? Well, on a micro level, nothing. Uh, on a micro level, nothing. But in a macro level, if a student isn't getting positive reinforcement for doing good, then more than likely they're going to do stuff that's going to get them in trouble, not because they like getting in trouble, it's because they like getting attention. And so it's always important that you hold on to those protective factors as much as you can. And while there are always going to be risk factors, uh, it's important that you always follow that up with some protective factors. Now, here's a really important part that I wanted to talk to you about is how to get rid of prescription drugs. A lot of times, uh, whether it's pain medication or medication to help with any kind of mental health issue, you may not uh, take all the pills. You may not be able to finish the bottle, and it's you can't just throw away a pill bottle, or you can't just flush them down the toilet. In fact, it's highly recommended that you don't highly recommend it not to do any of those things. What you may want to do is mix the medication with dirt, with cat litter, with coffee grounds. Just mix it with something uh, that's going to help have nature dissolve those medications. Uh, and once you do that, you place it in a sealed bag and you throw it away. Just make sure that there's more of the mulch, there's more of the trash uh, combined with the medication, to where there's for every pill there's 3 ounces of dirt or mulch or kitty litter. Um, and when you actually throw away the bottle that doesn't have any pills in it, uh, with a Sharpie or a marker or something, just scratch off the name, scratch off the information. Because believe it or not, there are people that go look through our trash looking for bottles, and that's really all they would need to get a refill of that prescription. And then when it's time for you to actually refill your prescription, if ever you need that again, um, the doctor is going to tell you, like, hey, wait a minute, you've already refilled this script 3 times. I can't uh, give you another prescription when it wasn't even you that did it. Okay, now how to dispose of them at home? Just like I said, mix the pills up with something that isn't something that nobody would want to look through. Uh, and when you have pills, be sure that they're locked up, uh, especially if you have children at home. Uh, Kids they're curious. They want to just see what's in there, and they see a bottle of Xanax that belongs to you, that you use it um, appropriately. But at school, somebody talked about how awesome Xanax is and how awesome Xanax makes them feel. Well, I mean, they might be inclined to want to try that. So just be sure to keep it in a locked space. I know the sheriff's department sometimes will have disposal sites where if you do have medication, to go ahead and take them there, and they'll appropriately dispose of them. And lastly, if you would soak them to dissolve in a in any kind of liquid, uh, and then throw it outdoors. Don't throw it in the trash can inside the house. All right. So the information I got for this presentation, uh, I did my research through these websites. So if you want to take a screenshot of it, or I can send my slides to Melanie and she can print them out, or she can email them to you if you can have this information readily to you. Uh, at this time, does anybody have any questions, anything you'd like for me to discuss further? I can do that at this time.
Yes, if you have any questions, you can either do it in the chat function or unmute yourself.
Uh, and, and if you do have any questions and you don't feel comfortable asking them right now, I should have wrote my email on here, but Melanie does have my email address. So if you want to reach me, just ask Melanie for my email, and you can email me directly.
And I'm typing my email in the chat function. And then also, Samuel won't be here, but at 4 o'clock in front of the Student Center outside, there will be 2 people from his department. If anybody wants to come talk to them in person, get some pamphlets. We also have pamphlets in the Advising and Counseling Services office as well.
Yes, I did forget about that. Yes, two of my coworkers are out there uh, giving out information, and they're also there to answer your questions as well. So if you see them, just say, "Hey, I was just in Sam's presentation. He did a great job. You should give him a raise." Right. Well, if there's not any questions, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for joining me today.